Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our reading in the Milwaukie Poetry Series. This is a reading that's actually concluding our 18th season, and it's listed as a bonus reading. It's a reading by a poet who is not currently in Oregon, but has ties to Oregon. So our poet tonight, Don Colburn, certainly fits that criteria. I want to thank you all for being here. It's a joy to see. I've been excited about this, and we're going to have an exciting evening. There are a lot of demands on our time. And so to make a commitment and to come out to a poetry reading like you all have, and you're here, thank you very much. So I want to welcome you from the Milwaukie Poetry Series. I also want to welcome those of you who have logged in. So thank you very much. If you weren't able to be here, that we are live streaming, as you know, and thank you all for logging in. The same thing is the case with you, that there are a lot of demands on your time. And so you choosing it to spend your time with us and hear a wonderful poet tonight. I want to make some thanks. Thanks to the city of Milwaukie. So we've been talking about this. The city of Milwaukie has been supportive of us from the beginning, and we're in our 18th season. So we're just very happy about that. Thanks to the Letting Library. And we are now in this new library, which is now 5 years old. And it's just an example that time flies, because it doesn't seem that long. But it's a beautiful new library. Our poet has read here twice previously, but this is actually the first time in the community room of the Letting Library for him to read. So thank you to the Letting Library for all of the support that they give us to do this. I want to thank the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee. So we do have a Poetry Series Committee, and as you know, you have to have a group of people working on something for things to happen. And so if I could ask a couple of people to stand. Kristen's already standing. Kristen Roder back here, and my lovely wife, Jade. And that's a thanks to all of the other members on the committee who help us out, who weren't actually able to be here tonight. And we want to welcome the Oregon Poet Laureate Emerita, who is sitting here in the first row. Let's welcome Pauline Peterson. Thank you so much for being here. Pauline was our consultant from the beginning, so we owe a big debt and a big thank you to Pauline, that everything that she's done in supporting poetry here in Milwaukie. I want to say one thing too before I introduce Don about future events. We have some things coming up. We have our first Friday on Friday, which is actually on the second Friday. But that's because the first Friday was on the 4th of July. And so we postponed it a week. So we are outdoors. We're going to be at Milwaukie Floral on Friday evening at 6:30. And the featured readers are going to be cousins. Linda Apple and Peg Gadira wrote the book themselves. They collaborated on the book, and Moon Markings. And so they're going to be reading from that book. And after that, there's going to be an open mic. Thirdly, we've had a special event that has just come up recently. And we are going to have something that we're very grateful for. If those of you that were here 9 years ago, you may have heard Elizara Tagdare, who is Persian. He's from Tehran. He is a translator of Thoreau's Walden, and his translation of Walden had just come out 9 years ago. He's going to be back in this country. He just arrived safely in Boston and cleared customs last night. He's going to be here on the 16th. So that's a week from tonight. A week from tonight here at, it's going to be a little later. It's 7:30 to 8:30, and we'll have a reception. And then he's going to talk about his additional translations that he's done since then, between when he was here the first time and this time. So on the 16th, 7:30. And there's going to be some more information out about that. If you don't have a broadside of one of Don's poems, so Kristen will get one to you. I want to remind you about your cell phones and telephonic devices. If you want to silence them, that would be great. And as I said, I've been really excited about this reading ever since we worked it out for Don to be able to be here. And it's terrific. Don came to poetry late in the midst of a newspaper career. Many of us know that. A longtime reporter for the Washington Post and the Oregonian, he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing when he was at the Washington Post. He's published 6 poetry collections, including 5 chapbooks. All 6 won or placed in national manuscript contests. The first was published when Don was 59 years old. His new collection is a chapbook called Purchase, which came out last month from Finishing Line Press. Don and his wife Nell lived in Portland for 21 years until late in 2022, when they moved to Maine to be closer to, he says, family and lobsters. They came back home to their Pacific Northwest entry every July to roam old stomping grounds in their VW Irvan camper. So I have to tell you a little story. I said that Don has read here twice. He read in the Pond House in November of 2009. And he read at the second reading when we were at the Episcopal Church. And it was just before we were moving into the library. He read in November when we were still over at the church, and we moved into the library January, that would be 2020. And for his first reading back then, what we were trying to do is having our flyers fit a certain space. And I've really forgotten why we were doing that, but we wanted to do that so we could post them, we could put them up. And so to do that, I was involved in editing a little bit of Don's copy to try to fit it into the space. And I was here working with this, and I got to thinking, I wonder how many Pulitzer nominations Don has. And I wonder how many I have. Maybe I shouldn't do that. So, and Don even said before that, he said, it's your call, Tom. But my call was to go with what Don submitted and not with what I did, what I had, and that's what we did. Our format tonight is going to be, Don's going to read for roughly 35, 40 minutes. We're going to have a question and answer. When we have the question and answer, Kristen is going to bring the microphone around, and please let her get there, because we would like to get the question as well as the answer. And then Don is going to finish the reading tonight with a final poem. So would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, returning to Oregon, Don Colburn. Don.
Thanks, Tom. Tom is a really good guy. I don't say your call to very many editors. And thank you all for coming. Holy moly. This is my first time, as Tom said, in this library. And even though I've listened to many wonderful readings at the old Pond House. It's good to be back home in the Northwest. About half my life ago, in another July, I showed up for my first poetry workshop at the Centrum Writers Conference up in Port Townsend. Paul Ann was there. But the teacher was a guy named William Stafford. My luck. I got in at the last minute because someone had to cancel. I was a reporter for the Everett Herald up north of Seattle, a newspaper reporter, and I really wasn't sure what I was doing in a poetry workshop. And as the week wore on, I have to say, I really wasn't sure what Bill Stafford was doing in there either. And it took me years to figure out and to write this poem. Differences. In memory of William Stafford. There was your knack for sounding regional in every region, and the way you swam out past the single-minded, past the blocked on shore, belaboring their alibis. Such gumption could hold a poet afloat in the cold sea, or start a car on ice, the poems sifting down like snowflakes, differences made of tiny differences. I think of you in your brim hat, white shirt, and old jeans, a morning's words in your shoulder bag, crossing the grass to sit with us in a circle outside the old Fort Worden schoolhouse. It was the summer of '84, and I wanted to be your student. But you were tricky like wind, and nearly drove me crazy when you refused, coyote-faced, to praise or blame. You wouldn't let us any more than generals use your mind. You steered us back toward recklessness. And I've just begun to understand this need to give a poem up, not to miss the next one. No one had ever leaned on me to lower my standards, make grammar an enemy, greet failure gratefully. All these heresies, a life in harmony under the voice. A poem finds its way the way you'd listen as you roved afield, alone, alert for local differences. And now to my new little book with the odd title. Here's the first poem in the book. One word or less, why do you write? Good question. Error, answer exceeds allowable word count. Jeez. Thought you were kidding about the one word. Give me a minute to think out loud. Don't start counting yet. How about memory? Nope, too vague. Curiosity? Nah. Too easy and all-purpose. Mortality? Too grandiose. Too woo-woo. Clarify? Getting warmer. Verbs do that. But if I were allowed to go way over the limit and revise, which for me is the best part, I'd say something about how writing helps you find answers to questions like this. Gives you a momentary grip on the world before it slips free and you start over. There's a word for this, a noun, maybe a verb. I just can't come up with it now. Sometimes it helps to change the subject, so here's one for you. Are you sure it's less and not fewer? Never mind, stick with less. Nobody ever says fewer is more. Less has more juice, more purchasing power, and wait, hold on. Purchase. So that's where this title came from. And I do think that all the poems in there, in their own way, try for a momentary grip on the world before it slips free and we start over. That's what we do. So I'm going to read now 9 or 10 poems, actually now 7 or 8 if you're counting. We'll see. And here's one prompted by a different kind of introduction from the one Tom just gave me. And this really happened. It's called self-portrait. Self-portrait. The MC for tonight's reading beckons me out of the coffee line, brandishing her notepad, wants me to know that introducing poets is a waste of time for everyone. How could I not like Terry, her lack of slack, her tone so right on, I take her seriously even if she's joking. Today her hair is purple. Would she say lilac? Maybe lavender. Here's my idea, she says, and I'm all ears. No book titles, no prizes nobody's heard of, no debut or garnered or iconic, no blurbs. I'll ask each of you one simple question, and your quick and easy will be the whole shebang. So, if you were a punctuation mark, and I flinch, I see Barbara Walters on TV ask Hepburn what kind of tree she was. Trick question, I say to myself, overthinking. Probably not a semicolon is what comes out first. I'm stalling, still in need of coffee. Terry nods expectantly. Not an exclamation point is my next attempt to keep truth in play without letting it box me in. Her nod this time gives a hint of miff. Not a comma either, I plod on, and now Terry's annoyed. Her brilliant ploy foundering on a poet's refusal to follow directions. Time's up, she snaps. Her felt-tip pen lands on the pad with a flourishing curl and a jab to put me down as question mark. Which I think is a pretty good self-portrait, actually. In the book, the editor changed self-portrait to self-portrait with a question mark after it. And I really couldn't argue with that. But I also think it's a good starting point for a poet and a newspaper reporter, for that matter, any writer, I think. I think of what some of my favorite writers have said about this. John Keats, over 200 years ago, in a letter to a friend, coined the phrase negative capability. That's an odd phrase, right? Negative capability. For when a writer, or as he said, a man, I guess, is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. The great Polish poet Wisława Szymborska said in her Nobel Prize acceptance speech, "Whatever inspiration is, it's born from a continuous I don't know." And William Trevor, the great Irish storyteller, said, "I believe in not quite knowing." A writer needs to be doubtful, questioning. I write out of curiosity and bewilderment. Speaking of negative capability, here's one about jury duty. Or more specifically, jury selection before the formal trial starts, when opposing lawyers get to question potential jurors and decide who they want to exclude from the jury. It's called voir dire, French for speak truth. Voir dire. No one knows except the man who sits there in cuffed silence and may not be innocent, though in our minds he must be, until proven otherwise. And no one else is allowed to weigh in on what happened except the lawyer wagging his doubt-free index finger and making eye contact with every last one of us. Or the assistant DA who said just the opposite. So one of them is lying, and it will be up to us. If they ask me under oath whether I can see both sides, will I have the guts to say that once we bring it all down to 2 words, or just the one, and the man is led away uncuffed or cuffed, and after the judge thanks us one last time, I can go back to where days are for the most part moot and not numbered, not exactly, and pour a tall glass and step out onto the back patio in clarifying twilight and wonder, is it ever beyond reasonable doubt? I guess it's no surprise I wasn't picked for that jury. As Tom said, Nell and I have moved to Maine, one Portland to another, as we say. And we've been rediscovering eastern spring wildflowers. So here's an old one, an elegy to my father. And near the end, it mentions a type of ground ivy. Wildflowers. Until I heard the names in my own voice, I never saw them whole. Chickweed, toothwort, mayapple, Dutchman's breeches, Indian pipe. A list was my father's way of witnessing. It made a flower real. And this afternoon in the weedy meadow by the towpath, I'm jotting odd names on a scrap of paper for no one in particular, myself maybe, or my father. Back then, I let him teach me to look down at the ground for stars, bells, shades of blue. He was never happier than when we looked up accuracy's myriad names and he wrote them out in slanted letters. Now, over and over, like a child, I say, gill over the ground, gill over the ground, gill over the ground, and in the saying, see it blossom again inside its spilled blue name. The reason I mentioned the ground ivy is because once I read that poem and someone came up to me afterwards and I'll say mistook it, maybe, I don't know if once it's out there, I guess readers can do anything they want, but they thought gill over the ground was a human being over the ground, above ground, as opposed to my deceased father who was below ground, and she was really thought that was a great, maybe. Bill Stafford wasn't my only good luck back when I was discovering poetry in 1984. I spent a year-long journalism fellowship at Stanford. It was amazing. We got to audit any courses we thought, any courses except journalism. That was the only thing off limits. Any courses that we thought, and there wasn't much journalism there, any courses we thought would help us become better journalists. And we were also advised to try at least one impossible class. So I signed up for English 92, reading and writing poems, taught by Simone Di Piero, a scary, serious guy from South Philadelphia. Paul Ann knows. You know. Di Piero told us on day one, this is not social work. This is not therapy. And I'm really, really not interested in your daily lives unless you make them interesting. I was the only one in the room who hadn't written poems, me and 15 brilliant sophomores, which is why I showed up the next morning in Di Piero's office and told him, no offense, but I'm dropping out of your class. I was a newspaper guy. And I will always be grateful to him for convincing me to stay in. What have you got to lose, he said. You're auditing. I can't even flunk you. Decades later, we're still friends. And I know some of you are friends with him too. It's no exaggeration, really, to say that if not for that class, I don't see how I would be reading poems here tonight. I don't. So this is called Mentor, and it's the broadside. For Simone Di Piero. Isn't this what we all wish for, you said, as you swiped a rag across the chalky blackboard, erasing old scores. We were throwing darts against the back wall of a dive on the edge of downtown. You and me and J.D., all in our 30s, which made us dangerously old. It was loud and dark, and this was years ago, smoky throughout. Feathery darts hit bullseyes or missed, some not even close. No one got hurt. How we loved those meaningless tallies. My pint lasted a triple header until we took a table closer to the bar and switched from darts to liar's dice. We rattled and spilled our dice cups, then bluffed, held, caved, and called each other out. More scores, more clean slates that didn't count. One that did would be there in the morning as you sat on a stiff-backed chair, pencil in hand, this was years ago, to stare down another blank page. Here's a poem in memory of a dear friend and teammate from the Oregonian, Steve Carter. He was the consummate reporter with a passion for covering politics and education, but the thing about Steve beyond that was that on a moment's notice, he could and would be called in to help on any breaking news story anywhere. And he would write a solid report in context, on deadline. And that is an amazing gift. Every newspaper, every newsroom needs one or more like Steve. He was also a wonderful man and an avid fisherman. This is called On the Second Tuesday of December. Steve, we went ahead anyway with this month's Old Farts lunch on Zoom. Greg told about fly fishing with you in the Wallowas and over in Idaho, doubling down on a riffle in the Imnaha or Grand Ronde. How you fished in style, chest-high waders, and in your knapsack, a mason jar of martinis for later, with cigars around the campfire. So different from how we knew you at the paper. Always on deadline, all business, chasing new leads, another day trying to explain the world to the world. Or was it? Didn't we all fish those troubled waters for stories? You did a good job of it, this living, including the kicker at the end. Remember the last time we talked? Once we got done with the crappy weather and the election, I finally dared ask. Getting by, you said, so plainly I didn't know you were saying goodbye. Even now, forgive me, when I think of the parting glass you raised days later to your lips while you still could, I picture you at a bend in the river, up to your waist in swift water, as you cast your last looping line out and wait for it to thrill with attention from something below the surface, a cutthroat, or maybe a rainbow. Most of my poems are in free verse, not in a strict form. But another mentor, Peter Sears, whom some of you knew, kick-started me into trying a form called the villanelle. I like the sound of that. And I think Peter did too. He taught a class on the villanelle, and of course he called the class Hell's Bells of Villanelle, which is so Peter. It's a demanding form, a 19-line poem, which is already weird, right? 19 lines, with lots of rhyme and repetition in a precise scheme. And the cool thing is that once you come up with the two main repeating lines, they repeat 4 times, so you've got a third of the whole poem done. The trouble is that you're also stuck with those lines, and they better bear repeating. I've written a few villanelles, 2 in this book. I'll read one. And all of them, I think, and those of you who write poems, I think probably know this. All of the villanelles that I write happen to be about really big, complex, unwieldy issues that I almost didn't dare write about. And the form, the villanelle form, paradoxically helped me with that because it distracted me from my own doubts. And the form also helped contain this complexity and keep the poem from flying apart, I hope. Here's one. Onlookers at 38th and Chicago, in memory of George Floyd. And I don't need to say this, but now I'm saying it anyway. You'll hear, if you listen, you'll hear the repetition, some of it and maybe the rhymes too. Onlookers at 38th and Chicago. Before George Floyd, I always found a way with someone on the news about to die to close my eyes or turn and look away. But now I've watched that video ricochet, and I cannot turn my head, hard as I try, each time before George Floyd passes away. He doesn't pass away. They kill him, splayed face down beside the right rear tire, his eyes ablaze with terror, calling, "Mama!" Airway choked off, cop kneeling on his neck, no way to turn his head. 3 men in blue stand by. Before George Floyd, they always found some way to say the dead man was a threat to put away for good. Can't breathe, his hoarse whisper, a cry to officers who look and look away. Onlookers all, we can't unhear his why. Bystanders, no excuse for standing by. George Floyd, dying, showed us another way. He couldn't close his eyes or look away. I'm going to find one to read, really. Here's an old one. In the unlikely event of a water landing, and this poem goes back to 2009 and deals with a news event that you all, I'm pretty sure of this, saw or heard about on the news. In the unlikely event of a water landing, U.S. Airways Flight 1549. When the pilot told us to, I couldn't take my glasses off and put my head down between my knees. I wanted to watch to the last moment before smithereens. Closing your eyes won't help, not like in music. The eerie part wasn't death touching down early, but how quiet it was, how smooth. We were gliding. The buzz and rumble of engines gone, and I could hear everything. The crying, less than you think. Hail Marys, the man up front trying against the rules to call home. An old woman many rows back sang beautifully in Spanish, maybe to God, I don't speak that language. I wish I had known they called the captain Sully, and how Sully was a glider pilot, too. We had no idea why it was happening, no inkling of geese or gulls, but we were losing altitude, and the quiet sounded terribly wrong. After we banked left, Sully brought us down easy onto the river. The trick is to ride the thickening air down slow and plow into the water, head up like a duck, not to nosedive, jackknife, cartwheel, burn. When we didn't die, some panicked. Suddenly there was time, and ice water sloshing at our ankles, our knees. How long can a heavier-than-air machine float? Someone named Josh knew to knock the door out over the wing. I didn't notice the guy carrying his garment bag or the lady screaming for her shoes. I just remember getting pushed toward a hole in the side of the plane and tumbling out into the cold, gray, blinding afternoon, which held me. I came to my feet on the submerged wing with the others, and we walked on water. Thank you. I think that's a kind of extreme purchase, right? That's why. So, I'm done. There's cook. Can I get those cookies? Can I have a cookie now? No, I'm just kidding. But I'll get one before I leave. Do I have to stay up here?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to answer questions and answers. And we have time for it.
Yeah. I should have read more.
Yeah, so we're at the question and answer period for Don. So you might give you some thought of what you'd like to ask. Do you want to start it off? You want to start it off? Okay. Here.
Okay. This is a weird question. Is the mall in Portland still there? I used to work there.
Well, here's a weird answer. Yes.
Oh, cool. Have you been in the ups and downs? Is that still there? I know it's not. That company went out of business. That's okay. How about Old Orchard Beach? Have you ever been down there to the carnival? And okay.
Down there in 1957 too, but
It's changed. I love your poems. Thank you.
Okay.
not to challenge it.
Well, I know one thing I'm always interested in is how the book came together. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that? What was the process? How did you decide which poems to put in? Are they different from your previous book?
I don't know if they're different.
I'll give this back to you.
Does this mean you haven't heard a word I've said before now? When it was over here? Oh, somebody should have said something. Well, pretty slowly, for one thing, it came. I don't know if it's different from my others. As Tom mentioned, I have one full book and 5 chapbooks, which is weird. Everybody know what a chapbook is? It's a little book. It has a number of meanings, but it tends, I guess the basic answer is that a chapbook is, boy, I almost said less, fewer than 40 poems, right? 40 poems or fewer, or 40 pages and fewer. Anyway, I've had trouble, for 20 years now, I've tried to put together a longer collection, a bigger book, and it hasn't worked. It's too unwieldy, and it's hard for me. And it's easier for me to chip away at a smaller, more finite group of maybe 25 poems. And so that's one part of it. The title came to me sort of in the middle of the process. I didn't have a working title before that, and then it was just weird enough, the title, to be interesting and a bit of a challenge to see if I could include poems that in whatever way I could claim were seeking a kind of foothold on the world. It turns out that's a lot of poems, I think, but I don't know. It went around and came back a lot of times before this version, and that's the way it goes. I think with most of us, we get a lot of turn downs. I was going to say rejections. I don't know. That's a bit loaded, but we get used to that. And in truth, the book gets better. Are there You're not my editor anymore. I don't want this to get around, but it gets better because you keep revising it during all those rejections, and I have to admit it did get better. What else can I say? I don't know. I don't know. I'm still not sure about it. I mean, but it's sort of done. It's out there. Somebody say something.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Don, you've talked a lot about, you've talked a bunch about revision. When do you know to stop?
You don't, but you do stop.
Why?
Several these journalists. one possibility is that you sort of give up, but a better possibility is that you think it's really not getting better any longer, and you keep on even in the face of rejection or turn downs if you believe in it. You have to believe in Kent Haruf. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Haruf. Haruf. He says to his students, you have to believe in yourself despite the evidence. And so there's a poem in this book. I'm not going to tell you which one. Maybe it'll be a little challenge for you. I don't think you'd guess either. That came back to me 44 times from different publications. Now that's weird, because why would I keep sending it out 44 times? That's the only reason it's weird. But it did get better, and I believed in it. Usually I would give up sooner about that, or just, even if it's not in a magazine, you can stick it in the book, publish it. How else do you know? You don't always. I mean, there's still, tonight there was a few times when I thought, oh, why didn't I? But that's just a little obsessive. I do love revision, as I said. I think there are many kinds of poets, but sometimes I think there are two kinds of poets. The ones who love the blank slate and the sense of possibility. Anything is possible. The white page, you can do anything you want with it. And then there are the others, and I'm the others, who like the revision, like to have something. My poems start as a bunch of scribbles, usually on actual paper. The best for me is when they start on paper and they scribble all over the place. Oh, nobody heard that either. Instead of on a screen, because the beauty of the screen, it's great in journalism when you're on deadline, you get rid of whole things and move them around, paragraphs and pages, and the ones you don't want anymore are gone. But in a poem, I like to see the scribbles that started it out, and I don't want to lose those. And so until I get maybe at least to another draft and then I go to the computer and type it up and go from there. That didn't answer your question either, did it?
It does, thank you.
Help me. You don't know. One of those French writers said you'll remember this. One of you two will remember. You abandon them, right? You don't finish them, you abandon them. Who said that?
I asked because your guy, Simone DePiro.
Yeah, he was also your guy, by the way,
but
and
he's
Paul
your
Ann's
guy.
guy.
He has said, a poem's never done, so just get out, give it up.
Yeah.
And I was fairly challenged by that.
It's disturbing,
No,
yeah.
He considers his poems not done.
Yeah.
They're on my bookshelf, but they're not done. Is
Yeah.
that fair?
I think it is. I mean, because when we read them, we're still, in a way, playing around with them. Now, Bill Stafford had a much easier, simpler answer, which is you send it out there and it comes back and you send it out to somebody else, and eventually, and then if an editor publishes it, then it's done. It's their problem. It's not his fault, right? Didn't he say that? People said all the time, he published too many poems. He said, don't blame me, it's the editors. It's out in the world, and it doesn't belong in a way to him anymore, except it does. Melissa.
So one of the things I love about your poetry is it's both serious. Does it work? Does it work? Okay. All right. So you write, my favorite poems of yours are with characters like the young woman who couldn't get your name right at the coffee shop, or, you know, you just put us right in a situation that most of us have experienced. And I'm wondering how much of that comes from journalism too, from paying attention in a certain way, or is that connected at all, or is that just the way, I mean, you just see a story and you put it into poetry, but you also are really good with details, and I wonder if that comes from journalism.
I think some of it does. Attention, paying attention, which is important for any writer. Listening, watching. The journalism helped me some, I think, in poetry. I mean, at first it was just really strange, these two different forms of writing. Obvious differences. Journalists aren't supposed to make stuff up. Poets do a lot. In journalism, or maybe in prose writing, all prose writing, the computer or the page margin decides where the line ends. And in poetry, the poet does. And I think that's more important than some non-poets realize. It's a whole nother tool. It's a whole nother piece of punctuation, actually, the end of the line. And a way of changing pace and taking a breath. And the other difference, I think, is, and the journalists in the room would know this, especially when you're on deadline writing a news story, it's really a good idea to have some sense of where you're going and where the story is going and what the point is and the one question you're trying to answer or whatever. Whereas some poets will say, I don't completely agree with them, but I understand the difference, that you don't want to know where it's going. You try not to know that. A.R. Ammon said, the best time to write is when you have nothing to say. I'm not quite there, but I take his point. And that really wouldn't have pleased my editors at the newspaper to tell them that, you know. Oh, this is going to be a good one, Chris, because I got nothing to say and I have no idea where this is going and it's going to be your fault in a couple of hours. I don't know. I think each one, they're more complementary than I thought at the time. Before Di Piero, I had no use for poetry, really. I mean, I wasn't against poets. It was pretty amazing what they do, but it wasn't for me. I was a newspaper guy. But poetry taught me to pay more attention to the sound. I think journalism is maybe a little more, certainly television journalism is more about sight than sound, and poems are more about sound than sight, more ear, play it by ear rather than by eye, and pay more attention to the nuances of language if you have time. So there's no question in my mind that trying to read and write poems made me a better prose writer. No, I mean, I should have said that at the beginning. That's really, that is absolute. I'm not sure about the other way around, but that too, probably. There's cookies over there. Oh, sorry. Someone?
I have one. Now that I have the microphone, is that okay? Was there someone else? So if one of your poems in your latest collection could be published in the Oregonian, which one would it be and in what section?
Oh, man. Well, there's one about Don Larson's perfect game. That could go in the sports section.
All
maybe.
right.
That's a bit of maybe just a quick and easy answer. It'd probably be one of the shorter ones, though, right?
Yeah.
If it was going in the newspaper. I don't know. That would be up to the editor. Which one would I want? I don't know. See, I say I don't know a lot.
That's okay.
Yeah, I said it was okay. I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
I agree.
yeah. And that Don Larson poem, which I do really like, but it's kind of long. Maybe a little too long. The poem about Steve Carter, I don't know if that could go in the Oregonian. I could ask Madeline. Don't know.
Listen, good. You've got some good options.
Okay.
Should it ever arise?
Should it ever arise? Okay. I did have a poem in the Oregonian. Which one was it? That doesn't matter. I was in the East Oregonian once before a reading in Pendleton, and they said, that last poem I read about, this is where poets can make stuff up. I wasn't on that plane. Most of you know that, or could tell. But in the East Oregonian, the people who ran the reading put out a press release, and the East Oregonian reported it and said, Don Colburn did this, and he happened to be on that plane. That's fine. That's fine. Well, actually, I kind of liked it. If somebody wants to think that. So, what else? There's cookies. Yes?
A poem. We're going to finish with a poem. There are books for sale over here. So see John or Don and my lovely wife Jane for books. He's going to read. We're going to end. Yes. I know. We go to 7:10. We're going to end with a final poem by Don. And then there are cookies.
Okay.
Oh, and tangerines.
I'll make this a short one. Maybe this would go in the Oregonian. This will be a short one. Every year, the New York Times asks readers to send in their best brief bit of advice. And then an editor, a columnist, picks the ones that they like most and they print them in a column. So this one is called, there are quotes around the title. This is one of the examples from a few years ago. Be where your feet are, which seemed like also it was crying out purchase. That's why it's in the book. From best advice of New York Times readers, be where your feet are. There are 26 bones in the human foot, which is absurd, the 26 bones. No wonder it hurts so easily. Out for a walk, I come to one of those eye-level boxes on a pole in front of a neighbor's gone-by rose bush. A sucker for signs, I lean in to find under plexiglass a short poem about writing a 10-volume history of weather, which is absurd, the 10 volumes. But William James Collins, who goes by Billy, knew I'd believe every word. Here I am at a standstill, squinting, grounded, all 52 weight-bearing bones down there doing the job without attention to themselves. Most of you know Billy Collins. You do this.
Okay, I'll do it. There are cookies over here, so as we've already said, thank you again, everybody, for coming. Yeah, let's give ourselves a hand, please.